Have you ever wondered why stories of witchcraft appear in every nation, every generation, and every culture? What if the greatest deception was convincing people that spiritual darkness only exists in certain parts of the world? An ex-occult insider once said the battle is far bigger than most people can imagine, behind closed doors, behind rituals, behind hidden practices. A spiritual war is taking place. Tonight, the veil is being pulled back, and truth many refuse to discuss are about to be exposed. The question is not whether the battle is real. The question is whether you are prepared to recognize it. Many people hear the word witchcraft and immediately think of one continent, one region, one culture, one people. But that assumption has blinded countless individuals to a reality that has existed throughout human history. The truth is shocking. Witchcraft did not begin in Africa. It did not remain in Africa, and it is not limited to Africa. From ancient kingdoms to modern cities, from remote villages to powerful governments, from hidden societies to ordinary neighborhoods, reports of occult practices have appeared across the world. The names change, the rituals change, the symbols change, but the spiritual source behind them remains remarkably similar. That is where many people become uncomfortable, because once you begin connecting the dots, a disturbing pattern starts to emerge. Ancient civilizations, separated by oceans, often practiced eerily similar forms of spiritual rituals. Many sought secret knowledge. Many attempted to contact spiritual entities. Many pursued supernatural power. Many performed ceremonies designed to influence people, events, and outcomes. Why? Because humanity has always been fascinated by power that exists beyond the physical world. And whenever people seek spiritual power outside of God, dangerous doors can open. That is a lesson history has repeated again and again. Some people imagine witchcraft as something dramatic, someone standing in a dark room, candles burning, strange chants echoing through the night. But the reality is often far more subtle, far more deceptive, far more dangerous, because darkness rarely introduces itself as darkness. It often arrives disguised as wisdom, as enlightenment, as hidden knowledge, as personal empowerment, as harmless curiosity. That is how many people become entangled without realizing it. They are not looking for evil, they are looking for answers. But not every door leads to truth, and not every spiritual experience comes from a holy source. This is where discernment becomes essential, because spiritual warfare is not merely about recognizing obvious evil, it is about recognizing deception. The most dangerous trap is often the one that does not look like a trap. Think about how many people casually explore spiritual practices without asking deeper questions. They assume that if something feels peaceful, it must be safe. If it feels empowering, it must be good. If it seems ancient, it must be trustworthy, but feelings alone are not reliable guides. Many people have followed feelings directly into confusion, directly into bondage, directly into spiritual oppression. That is why awareness matters. The enemy rarely begins with destruction. The enemy begins with seduction, a small compromise, a small curiosity, a small invitation, and over time, what appeared harmless becomes a doorway. Many former occult practitioners describe a similar journey. They were searching for control. They wanted answers. They wanted protection. They wanted supernatural experiences. What began as curiosity eventually became dependence. What began as exploration became captivity. What began as fascination became fear. That pattern should make every believer pause because it reveals something important. The battle is not primarily cultural, it is spiritual. The battle is not between races, it is between light and darkness. The battle is not confined to one location, it is taking place everywhere right now. Some people dismiss all discussions of witchcraft because they have never personally witnessed anything unusual. But absence of experience does not equal absence of reality. There are countless things people cannot see with their eyes that still affect their lives. You cannot see gravity, yet it influences every step you take. You cannot see the wind, yet you can witness its effect. Likewise, spiritual realities often reveal themselves through their influence, through patterns, through consequences, through manifestations that cannot easily be explained. This does not mean every strange event is witchcraft. Far from it. Fear and superstition have caused tremendous confusion. Not every problem has a supernatural cause. Not every hardship is a spiritual attack. Wisdom requires balance. Discernment requires maturity. But denying the existence of spiritual darkness altogether creates another kind of blindness. And blindness has consequences. Imagine a soldier entering a battlefield while insisting no enemy exists. How long would that soldier survive? The danger is not merely the existence of an enemy. The danger is ignorance, because ignorance leaves people unprepared. Many believers underestimate how serious spiritual warfare truly is. They acknowledge heaven, they acknowledge angels, they acknowledge God. But when the discussion turns toward spiritual opposition, they become uncomfortable. Yet, Scripture repeatedly describes a spiritual conflict taking place beyond what human eyes can see, a conflict that affects families, communities, nations, individuals, a conflict that requires vigilance, prayer, faith, and spiritual maturity. The first step towards victory is recognizing that the battle exists, not becoming obsessed with darkness, not glorifying evil, not living in fear, but understanding reality. because you cannot overcome what you refuse to acknowledge. And this is where many people miss the bigger picture. The goal of witchcraft is not merely rituals. The goal is influence, control, manipulation, counterfeit power. The enemy seeks to replace dependence upon God with dependence upon alternative spiritual sources. That strategy has not changed. Only the packaging changes. One generation encounters it through ancient rituals. Another generation encounters it through fashionable spiritual trends. Another generation encounters it through practices marketed as harmless self-discovery. But the underlying temptation remains the same. Seek power apart from God. Seek knowledge apart from God. Seek protection apart from God. Seek identity apart from God. That temptation has existed since the beginning and it continues today. This is why believers must remain spiritually alert, not paranoid, alert, not fearful, prepared, not obsessed with darkness, focused on truth, because darkness loses power when exposed to light. Many people spend years studying darkness, yet never learn the authority available through faith. That is a tragic imbalance. The purpose of understanding spiritual warfare is not to magnify the enemy, it is to magnify the victory of God. The purpose is not fear. The purpose is awareness. The purpose is not panic. The purpose is preparation. And perhaps the greatest revelation of all is this: the real danger is not that witchcraft exists. The real danger is believing it only exists somewhere else. Because the moment people assume they are immune, they stop paying attention. The moment they stop paying attention, deception becomes easier. And deception has always been the enemy's most effective weapon. That is why you must remain watchful. You must remain grounded in truth. You must test every spiritual influence carefully. And you must remember this powerful reality: darkness may operate in many places. Darkness may wear many masks. Darkness may speak many languages, but truth remains truth, and truth exposes every counterfeit. When most people think about witchcraft, they imagine power, supernatural manifestations, strange rituals, unexplained events, mysterious occurrences. But what if the greatest weapon was not power at all? What if the most dangerous weapon was deception that changes everything? Because power can often be recognized, deception is designed to remain hidden. And throughout history, deception has accomplished what force alone never could. It has convinced people to open doors willingly. It has persuaded people to embrace darkness while believing they were pursuing light. It has caused people to surrender spiritual ground without even realizing a battle was taking place. That is why deception remains one of the most effective strategies in spiritual warfare. The enemy understands something many people forget. If a person can be deceived, they can be controlled, not through chains, not through violence, but through false beliefs, because beliefs shape decisions, decisions shape actions, actions shape destinies, and once deception takes root, everything that follows becomes vulnerable. This is why spiritual attacks often begin in the mind, long before visible consequences appear, long before outward behaviors change, long before destruction becomes obvious. The battle usually begins with a thought, a suggestion, a question, a doubt, a subtle distortion of truth. That is how strongholds are built, one compromise at a time, one lie at a time, one deception at a time. Many former occult practitioners describe how their journey never started with obvious darkness. It started with curiosity. They wanted answers. They wanted understanding. They wanted experiences beyond ordinary life. At first, everything appeared harmless, interesting, exciting, even beneficial. But over time, the atmosphere changed, the experiences changed, the consequences changed. What once felt empowering slowly became controlling. What once felt enlightening slowly became oppressive. What once felt liberating slowly became a prison. This pattern repeats again and again because deception always promises freedom, yet often produces bondage. That is one of its defining characteristics. Think about how counterfeit money works. Counterfeit currency succeeds only when it resembles the real thing. If it looked completely different, nobody would accept it. The same principle applies spiritually. The most dangerous deceptions often contain fragments of truth, enough truth to appear believable, enough truth to gain trust, enough truth to avoid suspicion. But hidden within that mixture is a distortion capable of leading people away from God. That is why discernment is essential, not suspicion. Discernment. There is a difference. Suspicion sees danger everywhere. Discernment sees clearly. Suspicion creates fear. Discernment creates wisdom. And wisdom is desperately needed in this generation because spiritual deception has become increasingly sophisticated. Many people imagine deception only in ancient settings, but deception evolves. It adapts, it changes its appearance to match the culture of the day. What frightened one generation may attract another. What seemed obviously dangerous decades ago may now appear fashionable, acceptable, even celebrated. That is why spiritual vigilance matters. Not because believers should fear the future, but because they should understand the times in which they live. Consider how often people pursue spiritual experiences without evaluating their source. They who see, birth, seek encounters, feelings, manifestations, sensations, Yet they rarely ask the most important question: where is this leading me? Is it drawing me closer to God or away from Him? Is it producing truth or confusion? Is it producing peace rooted in faith or dependence upon something else? These questions matter because not every spiritual experience carries the same origin, and not every supernatural encounter points toward truth. This is one reason spiritual warfare cannot be approached emotionally alone. Emotions fluctuate, experiences vary, feelings change, truth remains constant. That is why a solid foundation is essential. Without a foundation, people become vulnerable to every new idea that promises power, every trend that promises enlightenment, every teaching that promises secret knowledge, every voice that claims exclusive revelation. History shows how dangerous that can become. Entire movements have emerged because people valued experiences more than truth. And what's true, whenever truth becomes secondary, deception finds room to grow. That is a lesson every believer must remember. The enemy rarely announces deception openly. The enemy disguises it. He presents shortcuts, alternative paths, easier roads, attractive solutions. The offer always sounds appealing. The consequences rarely appear immediately. That delay is part of the strategy. If destruction happened instantly, few people would continue. Instead, consequences often emerge gradually, subtly, quietly, until the damage becomes difficult to ignore. By then, many individuals have already traveled far from where they began. This is why spiritual maturity requires patience. People often want immediate answers, immediate breakthroughs, immediate results. Yet, shortcuts can become traps. Anything that promises spiritual power without spiritual accountability should raise questions. Anything that encourages dependence upon hidden knowledge rather than truth should raise question. Anything that shifts Yugsvan, trust away from God should raise questions because the direction matters, the source matters, the destination matters. One of the most overlooked realities of spiritual warfare is that deception can influence entire communities, entire cultures, entire generations, not merely individuals. A lie repeated often enough begins to sound normal. A distortion accepted long enough begins to appear true. That is why vigilance must exist at both personal and collective levels. You must evaluate what you hear, what you believe, what you embrace, what you allow to shape your worldview, because ideas carry consequences, and spiritual ideas carry spiritual consequences. Yet, amid these warnings, there is powerful hope. You are not defenseless. You are not helpless. You are not left to navigate spiritual darkness alone. Truth remains stronger than deception. Light remains stronger than darkness, and wisdom remains available to those who seek it. This is what many people overlook. The purpose of exposing deception is not to create fear, it is to create freedom, because lies lose their power when recognized, counterfeits lose their influence when exposed, darkness loses its advantage when illuminated. That is why truth matters so deeply. Truth does not merely inform, truth protects, truth guides, truth strengthens, truth reveals, and truth sets people free. The enemy may attempt to confuse, but confusion is not the final authority. The enemy may attempt to distort, but distortion is not stronger than reality. The enemy may attempt to counterfeit, but no counterfeit can permanently replace the genuine article. Eventually, truth exposes what deception tried to hide. Eventually, light reveals what darkness concealed. Eventually, reality confronts illusion. That is why believers must remain rooted, grounded, watchful, prayerful, not because they are afraid, but because they understand the nature of the battle. And understanding changes everything. The moment you recognize deception as a weapon, you stop measuring spiritual realities by appearances alone. You begin testing influences carefully. You begin evaluating messages wisely. You begin guarding your mind intentionally. You begin recognizing that the greatest battles often occur before visible conflict ever appears. That awareness is powerful because deception thrives in ignorance, but it weakens under discernment. And discernment grows when truth becomes your foundation. The battle is real. The deception is real. But so is the authority available through faith. And that authority begins with seeing clearly what others refuse to see. One of the most dangerous realities about spiritual warfare is this: most people do not recognize it when it first appears. They notice the symptoms, they feel the pressure, they experience the confusion, but they never identify the deeper battle taking place beneath the surface. That is exactly why spiritual attacks can become so effective, because what remains unseen often remains unchallenged, and what remains unchallenged often continues to grow. The enemy understands this principle very well. He does not need everyone to believe in witchcraft. He does not need everyone to acknowledge spiritual warfare. He only needs people to ignore it, to dismiss it, to remain distracted. Because distracted people rarely prepare for battles they do not think exist. Imagine a homeowner sleeping peacefully while an intruder quietly enters the property. The danger is not merely the intruder, the danger is the homeowner's lack of awareness. Awareness changes everything. The moment the threat is recognized, action becomes possible, but until that moment arrives, vulnerability remains. The same principle applies spiritually. Many people spend years fighting symptoms while ignoring causes. They battle fear. They battle confusion. They battle destructive habits. They battle hopelessness. They battle spiritual dryness. Yet they never stop to examine whether a deeper spiritual conflict may be contributing to what they are experiencing. Again, this does not mean every struggle is caused by witchcraft. It does not mean every hardship is a spiritual attack. Life contains natural challenges. Human beings make mistakes. Consequences exist. Difficult seasons happen. Wisdom requires balance. But balance should never become blindness, because spiritual warfare remains a reality whether people acknowledge it or not. One of the enemy's most effective strategies is normalization, making destructive patterns seem ordinary, making dangerous influences appear harmless, making spiritual compromise feel acceptable. Over time, people adapt to conditions they should be resisting. They become comfortable with confusion, comfortable with compromise, comfortable with spiritual weakness, comfortable with things that should concern them. That gradual adjustment is often where danger begins, because spiritual decline rarely happens overnight. It usually happens slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. One small compromise, one ignored warning, one neglected conviction, one unchecked influence. And over time, those small decisions create larger consequences. Many former occult practitioners describe a similar observation. They often noticed that people rarely entered spiritual bondage through dramatic events. Most entered gradually, step by step, choice by choice, influence by influence. The process was subtle, which made it difficult to detect. That subtlety remains one of deception's greatest strengths, because people expect obvious danger. They expect dramatic warning signs. They expect unmistakable indicators. Yet many spiritual battles begin quietly, in attitudes, in thoughts, in desires, in beliefs, in areas that appear insignificant, at least initially. This is why vigilance matters, not fear. Vigilance. There is a difference. Fear assumes defeat. Vigilance prepares for victory. Fear creates paralysis. Vigilance creates readiness. Fear magnifies the enemy. Vigilance magnifies truth. And truth is exactly what many people need. Because one of the greatest misconceptions about spiritual warfare is the belief that only certain individuals are targeted, only certain regions, only certain cultures, only certain families. But spiritual conflict affects humanity broadly. No nation is exempt. No community is immune. No generation escapes the need for discernment. The battlefield may look different from place to place, but the conflict remains remarkably consistent. The enemy seeks confusion, division, bondage, despair, isolation, anything that weakens a person's relationship with God, anything that distorts truth, anything that encourages spiritual passivity, that objective has remained unchanged for centuries. Consider how many people drift spiritually without recognizing it. They do not suddenly reject faith, they simply become distracted. Prayer becomes less frequent. Convictions become weaker. Discernment becomes duller. Truth, the proofs, becomes less important. Eventually, spiritual strength begins to erode. And because the process happens gradually, many fail to notice until significant damage has already occurred. That pattern should serve as a warning because neglect often creates opportunities that opposition could never create alone. Many battles are lost long before visible consequences appear, not because the enemy was stronger, but because preparation was neglected. Imagine a soldier entering combat without training, without armor, without awareness, without discipline. The outcome becomes predictable. Spiritual warfare requires preparation in the same way, not obsession, preparation, not panic. Preparation, not superstition, preparation. That preparation begins with understanding. Understanding how deception operates. Understanding how compromise develops. Understanding how influences shape think thinking. Understanding how truth protects because knowledge creates awareness and awareness creates readiness. One of the enemy's greatest advantages is ignorance, not intelligence, not strength, ignorance. People who do not understand spiritual realities often become vulnerable to influences they fail to recognize. This is why spiritual education matters. This is why discernment matters. This is why truth matters, not merely for information, but for protection. Many individuals assume spiritual warfare only involves extraordinary events, yet some of the most significant battles occur within ordinary life. A Hawent Wei Ti Yung Hao Shi, temptation resisted, a lie rejected, a fear confronted, a truce embraced, a compromise avoided. These moments may appear small, but they carry tremendous spiritual significance because every decision moves a person toward either greater clarity or greater confusion, toward greater freedom or greater bondage, toward greater truth or greater deception. That reality should not create anxiety. It should create intentionality because every day presents opportunities to strengthen spiritual foundations. Every day presents opportunities to grow wiser. Every day presents opportunities to become more discerning, and discernment is one of the greatest protections available. People often ask why some individuals seem more resistant to spiritual deception than others. The answer is usually not mysterious. They have cultivated strong foundations. They know what they believe. They understand why they believe it. They test influences carefully. They refuse to surrender truth. For convenience, they remain anchored, and anchored people are far more difficult to move. That is why foundations matter. Storms reveal foundations. Pressure reveals foundations. Conflict reveals foundations. And spiritual warfare reveals foundations. The stronger the foundation, the greater the stability, the greater the stability, the greater the resilience. The greater the resilience, the harder it becomes for deception to gain influence. This is where hope becomes powerful because awareness is not meant to produce fear. Awareness is meant to produce readiness. You are not being warned, so you can live in anxiety. You are being warned, so you can live with wisdom. You are not learning about spiritual warfare, so darkness appears larger. You are learning about spiritual warfare, so truth becomes clearer. The goal is not obsession with the enemy. The goal is commitment to truth. The goal is not constant fear of attack. The goal is constant confidence in God's authority. And when that perspective becomes clear, something remarkable happens. The battle no longer appears overwhelming. The confusion begins to fade. Discernment begins to grow. Confidence begins to strengthen. And you start recognizing what many people miss. The greatest victories often begin long before the battle becomes visible, because those who remain watchful, grounded, and prepared are already positioned for victory before the attack ever arrives. After hearing about deception, spiritual warfare, and the reality of occult influences, some people begin focusing entirely on darkness. That is a mistake, a dangerous mistake, because the final revelation is not about how powerful darkness is. The final revelation is about its limits, and darkness has limits. Many people spend their lives studying the enemy, studying evil, studying witchcraft, studying fear, studying spiritual attacks, yet they spend very little time studying the authority available through faith. As a result, their perspective, D, becomes distorted. They know the threats, but they forget the victory. They know the battle, but they forget the king. They know the opposition, but they forget the authority greater than all opposition. This imbalance creates unnecessary fear, and fear is exactly where many people become trapped. The enemy wants people to believe darkness is unstoppable, invincible, everywhere, all powerful, but that narrative collapses the moment truth enters the picture. Because darkness has never been supreme, not once, not ever. Throughout history, every force that opposed God's purposes eventually encountered its limits. Empires rose and fell. Oppressive systems rose and fell. False spiritual movements rose and fell. Yet truth endured again and again. Generation after generation, century after century, truth endured. That reality should strengthen your confidence. Because spiritual warfare is not a contest between equal powers. Light and darkness are not rivals competing from equal positions. Truth does not struggle to survive against lies. Rather, lies survive only until truth exposes them. Darkness survives only where light has not yet entered. The moment light arrives, darkness loses its advantage. That principle is simple but powerful. Think about a dark room. No matter how long darkness has occupied that room, the moment a light is switched on, darkness retreats. It cannot negotiate. It cannot resist. It cannot remain where illumination has arrived. That image captures something important about spiritual warfare. Darkness appears powerful until truth enters the situation. Then everything changes. This is why so many former occult practitioners describe fear as one of the primary tools used against people. Fear magnifies problems. Fear distorts perception. Fear exaggerates threats. Fear convinces people they are powerless. And powerless people often surrender before the battle has even begun. But faith disrupts that pattern. Faith changes perspective. Faith reminds people that circumstances are not the highest authority. Fear says the enemy is too strong. Faith says truth is stronger. Fear says defeat is inevitable. Faith says victory remains possible. Fear focuses on obstacles. Faith focuses on God's power. This distinction matters immensely because spiritual battles are often won or lost long before visible outcomes appear. They are won or lost in perspectives, beliefs, convictions, confidence. That is why the enemy works so aggressively to promote confusion. Confused people hesitate. Confused people doubt. Confused people become vulnerable. But clarity creates strength, and strength creates resilience. One of the most encouraging realities in spiritual warfare is that truth remains available. You do not need secret knowledge. You do not need hidden rituals. You do not need mysterious revelations available only to a select few. Truth is not reserved for an elite group. Truth remains accessible. This directly challenges one of the core appeals of occult systems. Many occult traditions promise hidden wisdom available only to those initiated into deeper levels. The appeal is powerful. People feel special, chosen, enlightened, different from everyone else. But there is a problem. Pride often hides behind that attraction. The desire to possess knowledge others lack. The desire to gain power others cannot access. The desire to rise above ordinary limitations. Yet history repeatedly shows where that path can lead. The Yonkilesensi, Wentilang pursuit of secret power often becomes a trap because dependence shifts away from God and toward alternative spiritual sources. And whenever dependence shifts in that direction, danger follows. This is why humility remains such a powerful protection. Pride creates vulnerability. Humility creates stability. Pride assumes it knows everything. Humility remains teachable. Pride seeks control. Humility seeks wisdom. Pride opens doors recklessly. Humility tests doors carefully. That posture matters more than many people realize, because spiritual warfare is not merely about resisting darkness. It is also about cultivating the kind of character that refuses deception. Character matters, integrity matters, discernment matters, truth matters. Many people want dramatic solutions to spiritual problems, but often the greatest victories emerge through consistent faithfulness, daily prayer, daily discipline, daily commitment to truth, daily resistance against compromise. These practices may seem ordinary, yet they create extraordinary strength over time. A strong building is not created in a single day. A strong foundation is laid piece by piece. The same principle applies spiritually. Strength develops gradually. Discernment develops gradually. Wisdom develops gradually. Confidence develops gradually, and those qualities become powerful defenses against deception. The enemy prefers shortcuts. Truth often develops through process. The enemy promises instant power. Truth builds lasting strength. The enemy promotes illusion. Truth promotes reality, and reality always outlasts illusion. As this message comes to a close, remember something vital. The purpose of exposing witchcraft is not to glorify it. The purpose is to expose it. The purpose is not to make darkness appear larger. The purpose is to reveal its limitations. Because many people have spent years fearing things they did not understand, years imagining darkness as unstoppable, years believing they were defenseless. But naivety, that belief is itself a deception. Awareness should lead to confidence, not panic. Preparation should lead to courage, not fear. Understanding should lead to wisdom, not obsession. The ultimate truth is not that witchcraft exists. The ultimate truth is that no counterfeit power can permanently overcome truth. No deception can permanently overcome reality. No darkness can permanently overcome light. That is the revelation many people need most, not because the battle is imaginary. The battle is real, not because darkness is harmless, darkness is dangerous, but because darkness is not supreme, and it never will be. You now know what many people refuse to acknowledge. The battle is real, but fear is not your destiny. You were never called to live intimidated by darkness, confused by deception, or controlled by fear. Stand firm in truth, sharpen your discernment, and refuse to surrender spiritual ground. When darkness attempts to hide, expose it with truth. When deception attempts to speak, answer it with wisdom. When fear attempts to rise, remember that courage grows where faith stands firm. The battle may be real, but victory belongs to those who remain anchored in truth and refuse to back down.